Good morning and welcome to Code Rage 12. My name is Olaf Monian and today we are going to talk about single sign-on with Facebook. Again, my name is Olaf Monian and I am a Embarcadero MVP. I'm the owner of Developer Experts, which is a company where we provide consultancy for business customers. We also offer trainings, workshops and such. And I'm also the author or team member of various projects such as Indie, Interweb, or the TREST client in Delphi. If you need to reach out to us to get your project done, well, then just see www.developerexperts.net. All right. Well, today on the agenda we have Facebook's single sign-on concept, which is a concept to get your application, authorized in a different way than you would normally do. We will, of course, talk about prerequisites, the login flow, and last but not least, we will see a lot of source code actually. At the end, of course, there's the question and answers section where you can, get your answers, get your question answered. Originally, I wanted to show you also the two-factor authentication, how to implement that and use Google Authenticator for that. But it turned out that this is actually too much for just one session. And so this is going to be something I will discuss on my blog. And it's not just Google Authenticator. There is more and that needs to be researched. So today, just Facebook's single sign-on concept. Well, why is there a single sign-on concept, or why would you do that? The idea behind that is that you have a unique login procedure for all platforms for your application. The idea is that wherever you are with your application, you don't have to think about passwords and your usernames. So the only thing that you would remember is your credentials with Facebook. Of course, it could be some other provider, but for the sake of, what's currently, let's say hype, we are trying to evaluate how Facebook offers and implements the single sign-on idea. Important is when you create a password, a username, credentials for every single application that you use as a user, then you will have zillions of passwords that you have to remember. You have to write them down, possibly, or if you don't write them down, you probably have not so strong passwords. And those might even be very easy to guess for at least people that know you. If you write them down, it's dangerous to leave that list of passwords around. So it's easy to, get into your applications. And sometimes some users do that. They just use the same password for every single application that they use on a daily basis, which is not that ideal, because if one of those applications gets hacked, those who get your password from that single application can log into your other applications as well, which is not ideal, of course. So from a standpoint, from an application developer standpoint, there is also the need that you always have to think about how to store your users' credentials in a safe manner. That's not as trivial as it might sound at the first view, because we have seen so many smaller and even larger companies that just got hacked that, stored the passwords in a non-hashed way or used an algorithm to hash them, which is not so safe or not breakable. So, it's complicated. So if we can take that away from you as an application developer and from your users to remember zillions of passwords and to remember complicated passwords and to avoid to write them down unnecessarily, well, this is why Facebook and some other companies are offering APIs to centralize your application's login needs. So how would that actually work with Facebook from a distant view? Well, obviously, the user who wants to use your application needs an account with Facebook. Okay. Facebook, on its side, they, of course, take every step that is needed to keep their user database safe. Well, Facebook is large. They are really large. They spend millions of dollars probably every month or probably even every week to pay stuff to make sure that they don't get hacked. Of course, we have seen large companies getting hacked. Well, Yahoo, for example. But honestly, well, Yahoo is not a good example, I would say. Of course, there are people who just don't like Facebook. Of course. On the other hand, Facebook is probably the largest application, has the largest user base, so the chance that a user has an account with Facebook is pretty high. Okay, so Facebook keeps the user database with all the passwords, and then Facebook offers an API to present a login screen from any application, from your application. So you can trigger a login screen which actually comes from Facebook. And your user logs in with Facebook. It may be that your user is already logged in because the web browser might store or cache the login, the previous login. So in that case, the user only needs to hit one single button to say, well, I'm okay with that. I want to log in to your great application, and I'm okay to use Facebook for that. In return, Facebook sends a token which basically contains information from Facebook that your user, the user that just logged in through that pop-up, is validated through Facebook. And this token, this code, is then sent to your application server, to your server. And your server sends that token back to Facebook. And if the code is still valid, it receives back user information such as email, full name, and the profile image. That's all. That way, your application server receives a verified email address, the username basically, of the user who wants to work with your application. So you get user information without keeping your own credential database. And you know this user is verified. So you don't deal with passwords, you only receive back from Facebook the user email address. You can actually request more information, even friend list, posts. Your application could post to Facebook, whatever. But this is not really what we want to do here. We just want to use Facebook to log in. We don't want to integrate with Facebook and receive more information from the user there. And important, the user has full control about that. So the user will see what your application requests. Okay. Well, of course, there are disadvantages. Your users need to be confident of Facebook. And like I said, there are some users that don't like Facebook. So even though our demo application that I'm going to show today will only offer Facebook for login, you might consider offering an alternative way, or what kind of whatever you like. So, well, what happens if you or your user actually loses your Facebook password? Well, he's screwed then, maybe. But there are, of course, mechanisms, means in Facebook to recover your password and etc. What if Facebook gets hacked? Well, never say never, probably, but Facebook is probably pretty secure. They have a martyr of people fighting back for hackers and all of this. They probably can do that much better than you could do. So it's always a comparison of probabilities. The probability that you get hacked, that your server gets hacked, is probably much, much higher than the probability that Facebook gets hacked. Well, what happens if Facebook closes business? Well, I guess we are done then anyway. So that's not a real disadvantage, I would say. So okay, important is that your application does not get integrated with Facebook beyond the login procedure. So your application will not be a Facebook application or will even show up somewhere as a Facebook page or so. You only will register your application with Facebook so that you get access to the API, and that's it. So your application is not going to be a Facebook application. It's just the login process that we are using from Facebook. Very important. Okay, let's talk about the prerequisites, what you need to get this done. For the simple application that we are looking at today, I'm going to use Delphi Enterprise, the Enterprise Edition. This is mainly because I'm going to use DataSnap for the server backend. If you come up with your own third-party, whatever server-side communication, whatever interface you are using, which would run with Delphi Professional or maybe even with Starter, then you're good to go. The only thing that we really need is the TREST client. The TREST client is what we need to talk to the Facebook API. Well, first, of course, you need to register your application with Facebook. The link that you see down here is basically the overview about the whole Facebook login API, and let's have a quick look at that web page. This is an overview, obviously. And this overview, don't get confused. There are links for iOS, Android, web, and maybe even some other platforms. But what we are going to do is something cross-platform. So I will go into that in detail later on. First, you basically have to go to the My Apps section of that web page. You basically need to register your own application. When you go here, you can see there is already a Delphi login sample application that I created. You can create your own applications here, and we will have a look at app secret and so on later on. And the important thing is that you set up only a few things like display name, the contact email. That's something you need. You don't really need the privacy stuff, the terms of service, whatever, because that's for applications that really run somehow integrated with Facebook. For the login API, we don't need all that. There is one thing that you should look into, which is down here. When you go to your application that you created, there is a settings link on the left side, and here you get a valid authentication redirect URI, and there you have to enter exactly that URL. This is a URL, or basically a web page that Facebook provides us to after the login is successful, you will get redirected to that URL, and you need to allow that URL inside your application. That's important. Of course, you could have your own login successful URL on your own web server, or maybe inside your own application through a file URL. That's something I didn't try yet. And important is you need the client authentication login and the web authentication login to enable to yes. That's basically all we need here. The next thing is there might be some concerns about app review through Facebook. That's like Google and Apple. So if you submit an application to Facebook or Apple or iOS, there's usually some sort of a review. Mostly Apple is known for very strict reviews that you have to comply to this and everything. But here for our login application, as long as we are only asking for the email, the username, and the profile picture, we don't need any kind of app review through Facebook, which makes the whole thing very easy. So you can just drop in your application and into that dashboard we have just seen and get this thing going. So the API we're going to use is the REST API, which Facebook calls the manual login flow. This is this URL down here. We can just go to that one, take a quick look. It's basically the same website. You see overview, iOS, Android, and then you basically go down to advanced and manually build a login flow. There's all the information that you need. And here you basically get the first glimpse of what you will receive. This is the login dialog and some information about what you need to send to the server and what you get back. So the advanced manually built login flow is where we are taking our information from. So, and like it's saying here, it's for checking login status, logging people in, confirming identity, and well, you get access tokens, and basically you can also log out people again. That's something we don't look at today. All right. So, and the last thing, which is more from a user's perspective, is the URL that you would look at to see what applications did I actually allowed to be logged in through Facebook. This is the link to that page, and this is somewhere inside your regular Facebook API or a Facebook application, and there is an apps section, and there you have logged in with Facebook. That's where we are looking at, and we can go to show all. And you see there is Delphi login. This is the sample application we are going to work with. For demo purposes, I'm removing that from here just to make sure that you see how it would work from the very beginning. So I remove the Delphi login application from the applications that I have granted access or have granted login capabilities through Facebook. Okay, so this is basically the set of tools that you need. And well, so let's have a last look at the actual login flow. So I already mentioned that in very briefly, but here again, the flow is like the user clicks on some button, login with Facebook in your application. Your application would then pop up a web browser going to some Facebook login page. And on that page, Facebook asks the user to grant access to your application. And well, if the user is not logged in with that web browser, which is running on your system, on your user system, if the user is not logged in yet, then Facebook, of course, asks for the password of Facebook. So this is something Facebook organizes completely. So you only have to basically show up the pop-up for the login access. And then, well, Facebook also shows some detailed information what your application can do and what it cannot do. Basically, it would say, oh, this application asks for your username and for your email, but it won't allow the application to post on Facebook, for example. That's something the user can check, and it's a Facebook page, and so it's clear for the user what's going on. When the user confirms, then your application receives a token, or in the documentation, it's called the code, from a redirect which occurs in that browser. So there is a code coming back from Facebook to that browser. And this code is what your application needs to send to your own application server. So you have your application running on the device or the desktop of your users, and your application server somewhere in your data center, wherever. And when your application server receives that code, it's going to verify that code with Facebook. And if Facebook says, okay, this is a valid code and it's not invalid for whatever reason, then Facebook will send to your application server the valid and to be trusted email of the user trying to log into your system. So what your server receives is a trusted email address, which is the user that is sitting in front of your application on the user's device, without that you have to deal with passwords. So besides the email, of course, you get the username and the profile picture, and you receive another access token from Facebook, which you could use to crawl through Facebook's Graph API. The Graph API is basically the main API of Facebook, where you can request any kind of information for a user. So you could use that access token to ask Facebook for more details of the user. But that would only work if the user confirms that your application gets access to it. So it's not a access token that would open each and every information of your users. That's not the way it works. So your user has to grant access to whatever kind of information. And like I said, if you're trying to go into information which is not on the upper level or on the public level, your application would require a review by Facebook, which is probably not what you want to do. All this additional information, this access token, what you could do with it, this is not something we are going to cover in this presentation. All right, lots of talk. Let's see what we can do with the actual code. Before we dive into the real code, let's see what we actually have here. So what I prepared is a simple app and a simple app server. So on the left side, we have our application that we want to log into our system, into our application server. The application server on the right side is just a simple data snap server, which listens on a HTTP port here on localhost, obviously, and it has pretty much pretty standard endpoints like data snap REST, server methods, and here, for example, we have a version just to see that the application server is running. So let's see if the server still works. So it should open up, and well, it works. We get some sort of version information. So this is just to see server is up and running. All right, so sample application. So your user started his application. This is obviously a Windows application, but by looking at the format, you can see it's designed in a way that it could run on a iOS or Android device as well, because this is done with Delphi FireMonkey. Okay, so the user is gets a login screen presented, and well, continue or log in with Facebook. Okay, let's do that. So the user hits the button, And here you see the pop-up from Facebook that I talked about. This is from Facebook. Facebook basically asks the user if this application, the application is called Delphi Login from the perspective of Facebook. If this user, or if that application can be used from the user Olaf. So obviously I'm already logged in. So by being logged in means I used the system browser already to log into Facebook. So that's the reason why I don't see any kind of a password control here. So I can say, okay, that's fine. Delphi Login can use, I want to use Delphi Login, the application, and I'm Olaf, and that's perfectly fine. So I just hit the button continue as Olaf, and after a fraction of a second, the pop-up disappears, and we are in our sample application, and it says, well, welcome, you're logged in. That's all the application actually does. It shows the information, the user information, and some sort of mechanism to update some parts of the user information. All right, so let's see what the actual source code does. So let's go to Delphi 10.2. This is 10.2 Tokyo release 1 actually. All right, so what we got here is a FireMonkey application. This is the sample app exe, and we see quite a couple of units here, and we will go through every of the units to see what it actually does. So this is the main form of the application, even though that the form is called form login and not form main. The main form is the from the name form main is, well, basically the form that provides the actual functionality of the application. The form login when the application starts is the main form, and let's see why I'm trying to emphasize on this. Let's have a look at the DPR file. So first, we are creating a data module. That's where our business logic is. And we are creating the login form first. So this makes the login form technically the main form. And you might ask, well, why don't I check here in the DPR file if the user is already maybe logged in? Maybe we stored some sort of a session token or whatever, so that we could decide when this application starts, the user already logged in, and we don't need the login form. Well, remember, we are in a FireMonkey application here. The whole stuff that I'm showing here would work from a VC or for a VCL application as well, but for the sake of having this stuff on any kind of platform, I'm doing this in FireMonkey. And FireMonkey applications have a different startup nature. So you have the application initialize here, the create form for the data module, and the create form for the the first form. But in FireMonkey, the forms don't get created at that point. It's running later. So that's the reason why we can't basically have an if-then structure right here. And this is the reason why always the form login is created. And inside the form login, we will check if we really need to show the login form. Okay, up here, by the way, of course, I'm checking for memory leaks just to make sure I'm not forgetting to free something. And, well, unfortunately, with the latest Delphi release on 10.2.1, I think it's only relevant for that latest release. There is some memory leak occurring. It's documented under this quality item 1877.4, and actually this line of code and this procedure is what you need to fix that memory leak. Don't ask how it works. If you're interested in the details, just look at the discussion under the quality central of Embarcaderos. Okay, so let's see how the form login works. Form login. Well, just simple stuff. Down here we got a basically a color button, some styling applied so that we get the stupid borders removed. So that's the reason why we have a style book here. So it's pretty much plain stuff. And this is not an image, obviously. This is a label, and we have an image for the Facebook logo. So we have an on-click event. Well, not on the label, obviously. It's on the button itself. So, okay. Well, it says data module main login to Facebook, and show the main form after that if nothing goes wrong. That's basically what's going to happen. But before that, we have the creation of the form. And here's the code. If data module main says we are already logged in, then show the main form directly. So I have a method here in my login form to show the main form. And let's have a look how that one works. This is the code here. So to show the main form, in the case we are already logged in, during create, we just create the actual main form. Set the main form. This is important because we want to close or free the login form, and if we close the main form, which the login form is from the very beginning, then the whole application would terminate. So we need to set the real main form manually here. Well, then form main show, free ourselves, and then, well, just set the variable to nil, just in case somebody used it without knowing that we just freed the login form. Okay, so obviously the actual code is behind login Facebook. So this is all the code in the login form. Okay, next thing is let's look into the login Facebook method of the main data module. Here we are creating basically the pop-up for the Facebook login. I've done this with a factory just because it would make it possible to just exchange the way how we are presenting this web page. Right now I'm using a T-Web browser component inside a regular FireMonkey form. This is basically this form here. So there is a T-Web browser and there's a label for the URL, which is not really used. There is not much code, but well, there is some code obviously, but the important thing is it implements the iFacebook login interface that I created. And here we have basically two methods that we are using. It's a do login, where we are supplying an application ID, which is the identifier for our Facebook application that we created on the Facebook dashboard, and well, some sort of a register method that allows us to register a method that gets executed once the browser returned the code that I explained during the login flow slides. So not going into into every detail. So this is basically the browser. We are registering a little tiny method which gets executed once the browser, once the user hits the OK button to continue with Facebook login. Once that all succeeds, this method will get executed and we get back our user from the code that the browser window returns. That's the main function here. So this is how it works. Well, it's basically pop-up, the Facebook login, which is, well, the pop-up window, do log in and supply our application ID. And the application ID is a constant that I created in authentication values. So this is the application ID for my application that I registered on my Facebook developer dashboard. Okay, and we got the login URI and the redirection URI we are going to use in a bit. So if that fails, well, we're raising an exception, and after that we are checking if the user that we get back here, f-user, is basically behind that user property. This is a property in our data module, and that one reads f-user. So that's the reason why we can just check if the user is nil, then create another exception that the login failed. So after that, our user should basically contain information about the user that logs in. So that's all the application does. So that's how I designed the login process to work. Okay. So obviously, this is just simple stuff. Okay, there's an interface-driven browser pop-up, but that's not what we are focusing on. The important thing is basically that get user from code. This method will get executed in the form browser Facebook login. That's the pop-up, and this method down here is basically doing the stuff. Let me see where it is. So we are basically, browser did finish load. So once the pop-up finishes loading, we are checking for what we are getting back from Facebook. So this is there is some code behind that I won't show here because it takes quite some time to explain that. The more important thing is get user from code. So the code that we are getting here is that code that Facebook delivers to the user through that browser pop-up. And there is the point where we are going to ask our app server, obviously we have an app server client in our application, to log in through Facebook using that code. So the code is a long it's basically a long a string of numbers. It's probably a base 64 encoded something. So this code is what we need to send to our server, and our server will then ask Facebook what this code is, and if this code is valid. And if this code is valid, our server will receive the user information, the name, the email, and the profile picture. So, and this login Facebook is implemented on the server side. So let's have a look at the server. Like I said, the server is a data snap server. So on the data module, here in the client application, the sample application, we have a TDS REST connection. And this is connected to, well, obviously the server running on localhost here and port 8080, nothing special here. And what we did is I created a datasnap client class file. So that's what we got here. And the client classes are basically the access module to get access to the methods on the server side. So when the data module gets created, we are creating the app server client, and we are using the login Facebook method here. All right, so login Facebook is then obviously a method on the server side, So this is the server. We have the server container, nothing special here. It's basically just one server class, which has one server get class event assigned, and this is in T server methods. Server methods is here, and there is a couple of things going on. Okay, let's look for the code we are calling here, login Facebook. So the client sends the code it gets from the browser redirect from Facebook, and this is what the server does. We have basically request access token. So we are using a REST client to ask Facebook to verify the code that we got from the client. This is the code that comes from the client. We need the client ID and the client secret. The client secret is something that you will find in the dashboard of your Facebook developer account for that application. The client ID is obviously the ID for the application, basically. So the client secret, even though it says client secret, should never be in your client application. It should always be in your server-side application, because that's something that should be kept secret, and your client is something that you can't control. So on your server side, you can basically control who and what gets access. Okay, so we have a couple of parameters. Let's see how that's architectured. We got the REST client for Facebook, and here we have basically a base URL, which is the graph base URL for getting access to any kind of Facebook API stuff. This application, this demo, still works with version 2.9. There's already a version 2.10, but I didn't try 2.10 yet, so we just stick for 10.9 here. And then we got parameters. Basically no parameters in the client itself. And then we have the T REST request for sending the code to Facebook. And this goes basically to the resource of authentication, OAuth/access token. That's something that gets appended to the base URL. And we got a couple of parameters. The redirect URL, that should be the same that we are using from the client. If those differ, the whole thing won't work. You need to use the same thing here. And here we got the code, the client ID, and the client secret. So basically easy. So we fill in what we got, and then we basically execute the request. Here is some sort of error checker. Facebook sends back a 400 or 500. A 400 would be still something that you can read. There is JSON with error codes inside it. You can look at that on your own. And then basically, if nothing goes wrong, so this one raises an exception, by the way, if there is any kind of error. If nothing goes wrong, we get a JSON value back, and this JSON value has a value access token, and that value, that string, that access token is what we want. So we got the access token here, and we need to send a second request. This is the request for the user. So using the access token, we can ask Facebook to give us the user details. And the user details are basically here inside that request. And here we are just asking for me, because we are attaching an access token which identifies the request to come from the user itself. That's the way it works. So you add just me. It's me in terms of the user trying to log in. And you have to supply the parameter access token. And after that, we are again interested in the result or response value. And here we get back the verified email address of the user, JSON result, values, email, and of course the name, and a URL for the picture. So if all that worked, we basically can perform the login on our side. So do login is basically putting in the verified email address plus some additional data, the username and the image URL, into our own system. So do login basically does nothing else than execute a query which is connected to our own database, sample app DB. This is a SQLite database, which will be in the demo in the source files that you will find on my blog after the session. And here in that sample app DB, we just have a simple table for users. So this is the users table, and there's a John Doe and an Olaf Monian with email addresses, birth date, and image files. So what we do here, we just check our database if we already know that email address. So qlogin is basically just select everything from users where email is email. Okay, so we check our own database, open it, and if the record count is 1, we already know the user. It's already in the database. So we can create an instance of our tuser. Tuser is just a class that I created in a separate file, in the business classes file, and this is just a simple class for holding information about users. So go back here, and well, we fill in everything we got in the database. So we take the email that we got from Facebook as verified to be trusted email from the user that tries to log in, and we connect the user with its data in the database, which is in our case just sample data for the user itself. So if the login record count is 0, then that user trying to log in is not yet in our database. And what we do in this application, it depends, of course, what you want to do with your application, but we just create a new user. So here is basically just some code to insert a new user record into that database. So completely independent if we got a user or not, we are exiting this do login with the user in the database, in our own database, and we basically return the user that we created. The user that we created from that function. So this is the user, the result is what we are returning. So what the login Facebook method receives or sends back to the client is an instance of this tuser, either an existing one from our database or a newly created. So it's basically an easy process to automatically register users with your application. So now we are basically back from the server side. We are back in the data module of the client, and we get our instance of the user, or if anything fails, we get back an empty user, or basically an exception, and then set the user to nil. So our data module knows there is a user, login is successful, or if there is no user, successful, login failed. So there is a user, and in the login, if nothing fails, we can just go on and show the main form. This is where we are now in the application. So this would be the main form now. And of course, you might think about things like updating data, user updated, and we can go to the database here and verify that. So this is basically standard stuff. And oops, I started it twice here. Here we go. And there's still my full name here. I'll do a refresh and it goes to an abbreviation of my first name. So this all works, but here is now the point where in a further session, which I will probably post on my blog anytime soon, we might talk about two-factor authentication, where we think about what happens if the user tries to modify very sensitive data. Well, private personal data, account profile data is probably considered very sensitive. So here we might jump in with something called two-factor authentication. So if we want to update sensitive data, we probably want an additional level of security, and that's where two-factor authentication comes in, and that's something I'm gonna cover on my blog post later. Okay, so this is basically what I get for today. The actual source code will be on my blog. The URL for the blog is here, and I should be available for questions and answers right after that. Thank you.